animated villains can be unforgettable when they speak with purpose. But here's the problem: when their dialogue turns into endless monologues or cringy one-liners, they lose all menace. Syndrome's
"You got me monologuing"
perfectly mocked this mistake. So how do you avoid cheesy villain talk and create lines that stay with the audience long after the credits roll? There are about 3 ways to write and ruin villain dialogue. But perhaps the most important one to know first is ensuring that the villain shuts up about their plan. This rule demands that you show and not tell. It looks useful on the page to let a villain narrate their plan, but it is unrealistic. How many times have you seen real criminals taking a break to narrate their life and future in the middle of their crime? But you still see writers make this mistake even after many years ago Syndrome from The Incredibles provided a classic warning. On paper, Syndrome is a brilliantly set up antagonist, rejected protege, brilliant inventor, a plan to replace genuine heroism with consumer-grade hero tech. However, in execution, he falls into the first trouble with writing good villain dialogue. He captures Mr. Incredible, and rather than finishing the job or finishing his plan, he talks. He explains his childhood grievance, and was rambling on about his plans when he quickly catches himself.
"You sly dog! You got me monologuing! I can't believe..."
This was obviously Pixar's idea to mock the tired trope of telling instead of showing. Unfortunately, many years after this warning, Hollywood is still stuck in the mess of explaining things to the audience. When a villain starts telling the audience how the destruction will unfold, it gives the hero time to think, regroup, and escape.
"Now I have a weapon that only I can, and when I unleash it, I'll get..."
Monologuing also robs the villain of mystery. As one writing coach bluntly puts it, villainous tell-alls are almost always lame and lazy. And they are. So why do writers still do this even in today's Hollywood? Well, the simple answer is that exposition is hard. It's quicker to have a villain explain why the city will burn than to reveal those details through slow discovery. It is tempting to have a villain say in one breath, "I was wronged, so now I will destroy everything," because it solves a problem on the page. However, that shortcut turns dialogue into a lecture and the villain into a narrator. Every villain believes they are justified. They see themselves as the hero of their own story. Use that. Let their actions show their conviction instead of letting them monologue their motives to anyone who will listen. King Magnifico from Disney's Wish serves as a modern example of a villain who relies too heavily on expositional dialogue. His dialogue often spelled out his motivations and internal conflicts rather than allowing them to be shown through action. For example, in his first encounter with the protagonist Asha, he delivers a lengthy monologue explaining why he collects the wishes of his people.
"They give their wishes to me willingly, and I make it so they forget their wound."
King Magnifico was already a terrible villain, but this tell, don't show approach makes his character even less like a genuinely menacing figure and more like a mouthpiece for the film's central conflict. This leaves little to the imagination and removes any sense of mystery or genuine menace. His descent into madness is also explicitly stated rather than subtly revealed through his increasingly erratic actions. But then again, Wish was already a terrible movie to begin with. What more can we expect from its villain? Now, let's talk about something that makes actual sense. In other words, Scar from the 1994 film The Lion King. Scar never tells Simba, or the audience, his whole plan. He reveals pieces through tone, movement, and a few choice words. When Scar convinces the young cub to the gorge, it was a lesson in manipulation. He speaks softly and positions himself as a kind uncle, suggesting that Simba stay put so Mufasa can surprise him.
Come on, Uncle Scar.
No.
you. This is just for you and your daddy.
The trap unfolds with calm words and careful actions, and he wouldn't have said so much to Simba right there if the cub wasn't so pressing with his questions. Anyway, Scar subsequently shows us the result of his jealousy and wickedness when he throws Mufasa off a cliff and watches the stampede swallow him. Terrible villain dialogue would have had him explaining the source of his bitterness. But that wasn't all. Scar also shows that dialogue works when used as a weapon. After Mufasa's death, he tricks Simba into believing it was his fault.
The king is dead. And if it weren't for you, he'd still be alive.
This fits his nature, envious, cunning, and ruthless in his pursuit of power. There is no time wasted on a backstory seminar, which is why the live-action remake sucked. That Scar was all emotions and words, whereas this one lets action speak. Seriously, the fact that he economizes his words intensifies the deed, and so does the musical score that accompanies it. His restraint made him colder. The ambiguity let the audience imagine motives darker than any speech could, and even when he spoke, his words were used as a weapon of deceit or manipulation. Furthermore, props and environment are another layer you must see. When the villain manipulates the stage, the dialogue becomes punctuation rather than the body of the argument. A villain who talks while pacing like a lecturer as their captive struggles looks silly and unrealistic. But a villain who circles the hero, toys with a blade, or casually rearranges family photos uses the room to build tension. That silent rearrangement can be far scarier than a speech about revenge because it puts the threat in the visual plane, letting the audience and the hero see what is at risk. Conclusively, showing builds tension and is more realistic than telling. But here's the thing, sometimes showing is not enough. You have to tell too. Except there's one way to do it right. That is, of course, aside from using it as a weapon like Scar did earlier. Take Tai Lung from Kung Fu Panda 1, for example. He's a perfect example of someone who shows without telling. From his very first scene, we meet a bad guy who shows us his viciousness, fearlessness, and bitterness. But he doesn't stop it there. He merges this with the right kind of dialogue, which is simply a representation of his personality, flaws, and motivations through his words. And that's the trick right there. Your villain's dialogue should reflect their personality and motivations. The best villain lines feel like only that character could have said them. To achieve this, you need to understand their motivations. If your villain believes fervently in their mission or grievance, let that be reflected by what they say. The first time Tai Lung spoke, his voice was that of a narcissist.
I'm glad Shifu sent you. I was beginning to think
Dude simply speaks from his ego instead of explaining it. His dialogue also perfectly captures his deep-seated sense of betrayal. His confrontation with Shifu is a masterclass in this. He channels it through a bitter personal attack. When he says,
I have come home, Master.
There is a gross sense of entitlement and mockery in his tone. He is a scorned son. Every line he delivers to Shifu is a jab at their former relationship. He uses his former master's title, Master, as a weapon, twisting it to highlight the betrayal he feels. He doesn't monologue about how he will destroy the valley. He doesn't need to. He would show this with his actions. But first, he wants vengeance against the one person who denied him the Dragon Scroll and his destiny. Therefore, when he confronts Shifu, his dialogue is fueled by a desperate need for validation, and you can hear that in his voice, his tone, and his choice of words.
Not your fault? Who filled my head with dreams?
He does all this while kicking the living daylight out of Shifu. Now that's how you use dialogue. The tragedy is merged with the menace. His words reveal a character who, despite his immense power, is still a hurt and angry child, and that's a far more compelling villain. He's so wrapped up in his own perceived victimhood that his dialogue becomes a tool to lash out at those who, in his twisted view, wronged him. Always tie the tone of the dialogue to the character's core. Avoid one-size-fits-all evil talk. Not every villain needs to sound like a Shakespearean tyrant. Consider their background and adapt their voice. A tech genius villain might use technical jargon or precise language. A crime boss could speak in street-smart, clipped sentences. Authenticity makes dialogue believable. Distinct speech patterns can also give your villain a unique voice. Maybe they use elaborate metaphors, or they never use contradictions, sounding annoyingly formal. Perhaps they always say, "Mother knows best," like Mother Gothel in Tangled. Little dialogue ticks or signature phrases can make them memorable. Just be careful not to turn them into a catchphrase machine. Keep it subtle enough to be natural. The goal is that if someone reads a line of dialogue out of context, they could guess it's your villain speaking. Titan in Megamind also nails the merging of personality with dialogue perfectly. He serves as a fantastic example of a villain whose dialogue is a direct reflection of his core character flaws. His dialogue is the one-note joke about a loser with power, but that's what makes it so effective. Before he gets his powers, Hal is a cynical, immature, and whiny cameraman.
Love, not love. We're not in love. I love you. Hey, I love you. Whatever. But I'm not.
He has the voice and mindset of a perpetual loser. When he becomes Titan, a superpowered being, his manner of speaking barely changes. He still talks like a child, but now with a sense of entitlement.
You are lucky to have such a great hero here. Oh no! Somebody!
His dialogue is filled with childish complaints and a naive mindset that having powers means things should be easy for him. This is brilliant because his dialogue is meant to be a pathetic display of a spoiled brat who can't take no for an answer. He still acts like a child, throwing tantrums and saying things like,
"There is no Easter Bunny, there is no Tooth Fairy, and there is no Queen of England."
This perfectly encapsulates his character. He's simply a loser who has powers, and is being a massive inconvenience. This is another reason why we can excuse his monologuing, because children tend to blab about crap. But one villain we can never excuse for failing to land the personality mixed with dialogue style is Prince Hans from Frozen. His dialogue is a prime example of a villain whose lines are written for the sake of a twist rather than for a genuine character. For most of the film, Hans is the perfect prince, charming, supportive, and kind. His dialogue is filled with generic romantic platitudes and heroic statements. He's the one who says,
I would never shut you out.
And offers to help Anna save her kingdom. Every line he delivers is a carefully constructed lie designed to deceive both Anna and the audience. However, the problem is, once his villainy is revealed, his dialogue abruptly changes, but not in a way that feels like a natural shift in character.
I, on the other hand, am the hero who is going to save Arendelle from destruction.
It's a complete 180-degree turnaround that feels unearned. He goes from being a polite, earnest suitor to a sneering villain in a single scene. You might not know this, but the writers of Hans could have even used dialogue to foreshadow him. Just look at Lotso from Toy Story 3. His negative view towards toy owners was seen earlier on, and so was his sense of control disguised as care.
Well, it's his loss, Sheriff. Can't hurt you no more.
Whoa.
Now let's get you all settled.
He even goes as far as lying that the kids at Sunnyside love new toys, when, as it turned out later, they didn't. Hence, it was clearly hinted that this strawberry-scented teddy was up to no good. However, this was never the case for Hans. There are no hints of his true nature in his earlier lines. No subtle double meanings or sarcastic undertones. His dialogue is one-dimensional and entirely dependent on the plot twist. He has no unique voice. One minute he has a hero voice, and the next it is swapped out for a villain voice. His lines aren't a reflection of his internal thoughts or feelings. And this is why, compared to a villain like Tai Lung, Hans is forgettable. His dialogue fails to create a unique and lasting impression because it is not tied to a consistent character. But aside from pairing personality with a villain's words, there's one other thing you can do with their dialogue. If you get this right, then you've cracked the dialogue code for sure. Telling the audience what they already know is the fastest way to turn a scary scene into a lecture. Villains who state the obvious strip the moment of tension because they treat viewers like they missed some memo. Good villain dialogue turns the room on its head. Bad villain dialogue hands the audience a blueprint. Look at Dawn Bellwether in Zootopia. Her reveal is the kind of line that crushes real drama. She blows it because she keeps telling us things we already know, and in doing so, she ruins the slow burn betrayal. The movie had set up the prey versus predator anxiety from scene 1. Even though we are told that prey and predators now live harmoniously together, we can already see that predators still have the upper hand. Even the awful treatment of Bellwether by Lionheart cements that fact. Yet she tells Judy,
"Well, our city is 90% prey, Judy. Right now, they're just really scared."
This was before her reveal as the villain, and to be honest, it wasn't entirely a bad thing to say to Judy, considering the situation. However, following her reveal, she says this.
"But prey outnumber predators 10 to 1.
Dude, that's the same thing as 90% prey and 10% predator. But it gets worse because then she said,
90% of the population united against a common enemy."
That repetition is just irritating. The villain who needs to explain the problem aloud looks small next to the one who creates the problem and never has to say why. Worse, her most damning move is to turn motive into a manifesto on camera. Lines like, "Fear always works," and "I'll dart every predator in Zootopia to keep it that way," are a confession. And confessions are evidence when someone is rolling tape. Because Officer Hops records the confrontation. Bellwether literally signs her own indictment by spelling out the plan and the justification. That's lazy writing. A clever villain would weaponize omission and implication so that the hero and the audience have to assemble the truth from clues, not get it read to them like a press release. The twist feels forced because the reveal depends less on clever detection and more on the villain announcing herself and then being caught saying it. In short, Bellwether fails as a menace because she prefers exposition. Saying the obvious turned what should have been a personal, psychological unmasking into a public resume of wrongdoing. Saying the plan out loud made it easy to prove, and proving it by a taped monologue is a poor way to catch a mastermind. The movie needed Bellwether to be dangerous in the quiet way manipulators are dangerous. Instead, she becomes dangerous for 5 minutes and then undone by her own obviousness, which is exactly why her capture reads as an anticlimax rather than a satisfying defeat. Now, compare that to a villain like Charles Muntz from Up. His dialogue is a masterclass in subtlety and menacing implication. For the majority of his screen time, he seems like a kind, if eccentric old man, and his words are gentle and welcoming. But when his true nature is revealed, his dialogue becomes sparse and chilling.
A surveyor making a map?
Instead of outrightly stating that he murdered those people, he mentions their names and knocks down a helmet as he does. And with that, he communicates his madness, his paranoia, and the fact that he has murdered multiple people to protect his lie. The horror comes from the subtext of his words, rather than the words themselves. This subtlety is far more effective than a villain like Bellwether that states the obvious. Another thing a great villain like Muntz does is to make the dialogue poetic. Before he even starts knocking down the helmets, he gives a chilling verse when he says, And here they come, these bandits, and think the bird is theirs to take. But they soon find that this mountain is a very dangerous place. This was the beginning of the tension, and you can see the fear beginning to build up in Carl's face. He was starting to get the sense that Muntz was not the idol he had grown up idolizing, and we, the audience, started to get on board with that realization too. If you catch your villain sounding obvious, fix it by letting their actions imply intent. Have them drop a single cutting line that hints at the motive rather than explaining it. In short, avoid the obvious. But as far as avoiding the obvious goes, it might be the one thing you need to make an audience laugh. This video here gives a more detailed breakdown of how to and not to make an audience laugh.